Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, as a real estate professional, a property manager, and an investment property owner, I urge your support of Senate Bill 608 to give tenants throughout Oregon more predictability and stability. Many of you know my profession, which we just talked about, so I don't have to make a disclosure, which gives me a unique perspective of our housing crisis that we're in right now. But I want to take this opportunity as I introduce this historic piece of legislation to tell you more about my background and explain why I am decidedly passionate about this issue. I have lived on both sides of this issue. My parents struggled to keep a roof over our heads during my early childhood, and they divorced while I was young. My brothers and I went into a tailspin of instability. From kindergarten through 8th grade, I attended more than 15 schools in 3 states and 12 cities up and down the West Coast. Several times during those years, my family's electricity and water would be shut off. And looking back, I can imagine the shame that my parents felt having to explain to a 6-year-old why they couldn't afford to make their utility payments. I've experienced homelessness and extreme hunger. I remember couch surfing throughout the Los Angeles area with my mother after being evicted from our apartment. We'd sleep in a motel when we could afford it, and when we couldn't, we'd sleep in our car. A traumatic experience I vividly remember when I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with my father and brother in the east side of Portland. It was an old building with deferred maintenance, and this was my first experience with cockroaches. My brother and I had to trade off between sleeping on the couch while the other slept on the floor. And I can still remember the terror that I felt laying on the floor with the blankets covered over my head, just hoping and praying that the cockroaches wouldn't crawl all over me during the night. And going to school was even more of a challenge. More times than I can remember, as we drifted from city to city, from school districts, around different communities, I'd be escorted into a new class, and always in the middle of a term, I would be handed an assignment from my new teacher. And I remember having this paralyzing feeling of what to do and what even to say. I felt lost and embarrassed as I tried to mix in with my new classmates. And colleagues, I can go on and on. But my story is one example of the displacement and what displacement looks like here in Oregon. And displacement is devastating. And honestly, I think it's no small miracle that I'm standing among this esteemed body today, and I'm very thankful for that. But unfortunately, we have too many children across our state who are experiencing the same pain that I felt growing up as a boy. Oregon is facing a statewide housing crisis. Many landlords do right by their tenants, but unreasonable rent increases and no-cause evictions are destabilizing some of our most vulnerable families. And after years of discussions and negotiations, we have a fair bill before us that will limit no-cause evictions and prevent the problematic rent gouging that has displaced too many Oregonians for far too long. These protections must go hand in hand in order to protect vulnerable tenants, because if we only limit the use of no-cause notices, a landlord could use an unreasonable rent increase to displace the family. If we only add protections against rent gouging, a landlord still could use a no-cause eviction. These issues are two sides of the same coin, and we must do both. Senate Bill 608 establishes a statewide just cause standard for eviction. Senate Bill 608 also prevents rent gouging by limiting annual rent increases on individual tenants to 7% plus the Consumer Price Index in a 12-month period. The bill maintains our state's current law regarding rent increases, prohibiting rent increases during the first year of a tenant's occupancy and requiring that landlords give 90-day notice of rent increases. Opponents of this bill have referenced literature about obsolete forms of rent control practiced during World War II to suggest that any limit on rent increases will negatively impact new construction. Modern rent regulation is not the rent control of the 1940s. These old opposition talking points simply do not apply. Landlords may also reset rents to market rate at the start of a new tenancy, as long as the previous tenant did not receive a no-cause notice or a non-renewal of their lease during the first 12 months of their occupancy. This provision ensures that the practice of many small mom-and-pop landlords who don't raise their rents on their tenants but catch back up to the market when a new tenancy starts is protected under this bill. Colleagues, Senate Bill 608 has been years in the making. Too many have suffered because it is currently illegal in Oregon to raise rent 100% at a time or evict someone with as little as 30 days' notice for no reason. We have the chance to lead on behalf of Oregon tenants. This is not rent control of yesteryear, and I believe this is a smart, fair approach, an innovative hybrid solution that is one of several big things we must do to address our housing crisis. Why does this bill matter to me? I know the hurdles facing our struggling families when they are given a sudden no-cause eviction notice or an economic eviction with an extreme rent increase. We must do better, and we can do better, and I urge your support and your aye vote in supporting Senate Bill 608. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Senate Bill 608 is about providing renters throughout Oregon some predictability and stability with their expenses. And just for background, a number of years ago, when I was serving in the Air Force in Montana, I had a chance to become a part-time property manager for a small complex. And during that process, learned a little bit about managing properties. And so after my service, I came back home, and I was going to finish my degree at Portland State. And had a chance to get a part-time job with my wife managing a 100-unit complex, which was pretty big. And it was during that process that I started learning about Oregon law and dealing with our process of working with tenants in the community. And it was to my surprise that the owner told me to never use a for-cause eviction or notice because the no cause was much simpler and they couldn't fight it. So imagine, this is in 1990. I'm coming back and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. That doesn't make sense. So when I look through the history of my interaction with this, policy, I'm still shocked by it. As a realtor, I've worked with property management in the state and in my community, helping them buy homes, buy investment properties, and also I help people rent homes. And I go through the process of learning much more about folks than most people know about their neighbors. But I do a great job of understanding and trying to be empathetic and helping them stay and live in these communities that I manage. But I will admit that, after all these years, that it took me coming into this building to realize that it is our responsibility, this body, the Senate, the House, our governor, to protect our most vulnerable citizens that are renters, that have nobody else standing up for them. And if only one thing we do in this bill is to protect the arbitrary eviction of tenants, that's a win. But I'm also here to let we have a chance to do more than that. Let me give you an example of a tenant that came to our testimony Monday a couple weeks ago, and she's from the Monmouth community, and she was given a no-cause eviction with only 30 days notice to leave her apartment. And when she asked for a small concession of a 4-day extension so that she could move properly or get the chance to find another place, her landlord declined it. She then asked if she could move in with her mother, who lived in the same property. And her landlord said no and threatened to give a no-cause eviction to her mother as well if she moved in with her. When this woman shared the story, she was currently living out of her car. Instability is right there in our hands to control. We've heard stories from renters throughout the whole state, and members of this body have given their own testimony of devastating stories that affect their constituents, themselves, and their families. And these horror stories are just far too common. We have a chance to give those people a voice today, and we have a chance to provide basic stability and predictability to the 40% of Oregon households who rent their homes, and we can do it right now. I want to answer a couple questions that were brought up. You know, we do not have any documentation or any statistics about rural areas, or maybe what this policy will do, but what we do have, we have statistics that show our vulnerable renters and families out there are being displaced right now, not just in the Portland metro area, not in Eugene, not in Salem, around the whole state. And that's why this policy is so very, very important. And I love supply-side economics. And a number of us in this house and this floor today are working on the supply issue. But the question is, in an emergency, what do? When you're preparing for an emergency, what do? You plan. Well, we have a lot of policies that will, in the long term, do a lot to help bring more supply online. But today, in the sake of that, saying, oh, we're going to work on it, we're going to get you some homes. We're going to get you some homes. Just hold on. You can be homeless if that's what it takes. But we're going to get you some homes in 5 to 10 years. Ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, that is not the answer. That's why this bill is so important, to protect our families who are on the cusp of being homeless, who are on the cusp of being economically evicted because they just can't afford it anymore. And that's Oregonians from the northwest to the southwest through the central Oregon, all of them. I want to bring up a question that the good representative from Medford had. And I want to let her know that, or let the good representative know that small landlords are not exempt from this policy. What you are exempt from, if you do have the full notifications, you have the full rent, caps to deal with, but what you are exempt from is having to pay the relocation fee if you have to give that notice. So there's a little relief there. And so I just wanted to make sure and got that on the record. And just to summarize, doing nothing is not a good answer. And that's what our constituents elected us and put us in this body to do something, even if it hurts. Even if it hurts. It may hurt us, it may hurt your pride, but I think it's the right thing to do. Back to the bill, homelessness and poverty know no boundaries. And so that's why it's important, in fact, that we do it all over the whole state. And I want to mention that this bill was artfully crafted to not discourage new construction. Oregon is open for business. New construction is not in any way under the guise of this policy, except for the rent caps. Or no, not even at all. I'm sorry, misspoke. New construction, 15 years. They have to give proper notices, but they have no rent caps for 15 years. That's a good program, I think, and it's actually incentivize builders. We have a market. If we have a market, builders and developers will come and fill those needs. So I wanted to also bring up that trusted, nonpartisan economist in Oregon, including the Office of Economic Analysis, have said that they don't believe that rent regulation in Senate Bill 608 will negatively impact new supply. We need a greater supply of housing, and I am confident that Senate Bill 608 provides the needed stability for renters without deterring new construction that we badly need here in Oregon. Once again, I'm a landlord. I'm a property manager, and I will be a landlord and remain an investment property owner after this bill goes into effect. Becoming an investment property owner in Oregon is a great investment, and providing fair protection to renters with Senate Bill 608 does not change that. For these reasons, colleagues, I urge your aye vote and look forward to the passage of Senate Bill 608. Thank you, Madam Speaker.